what I want to do first is explain this picture and how I kind of arrived at the final image, which I will show you over here. This was shot for an interior designer down in Orange County, and it took a significant amount, you can see me kind of dancing around the room there, of lighting and bracketing and Photoshop compositing to get it to look the way I wanted it to look. And I thought it would be a good example because it illustrates a couple things that people often struggle with, and that is really capturing a view and the natural feel of the room without kind of blowing it out with flash, that sort of thing. So like I said, I just want to show you how I prep my files in Lightroom and how I get them into Photoshop and how I get to the finished image. So first things first, I want to explain to you kind of my workflow here. So like I said, this is for an interior designer. And what we have is a room right next to the ocean. I'm like 15 feet off of the beach. And she was really adamant that we capture not only the mood and feel of the interior, but also, of course, the exterior and the ocean. And if we properly expose for the interior, you can see I've got my highlight alert turned on. Our windows and view quickly go to hell in a handbasket. So my job as an architectural interiors photographer is to kind of combine all that so that you get the best of both worlds. You get the outside, you get the inside. So what I've done here is I've gone through, and every time I'm shooting, I will bracket 5 or 6 photos from 4 or 5 stops underexposed until 4 or 5 stops overexposed. And here's the first shot that I took, which is, as you can see, the interior is very underexposed. The exterior is about where I want it to be. I know I want the exterior to be properly exposed. I want those rich blues. So I kind of exposed for the exterior and let the interior just do what it will. And from there, added 1 stop of exposure to every shot that I took. Of course, we're on a tripod. I like to tell people that a tripod is the sharpest lens in architectural photography. Nothing is as important as a sturdy platform for your camera. And I keep going through and bracketing and opening up the shutter speed. So I started at like 1/60th of a second. Now we're at 1/13th, and then 1/6th, and then a full second, and on and on. But at this point, as you can see, it's completely blown out. So the next thing I'm going to do is add some flash. I like to add flash to kind of clean up the natural light, add some contrast and punch and texture, especially on the furniture, and give some directional light and lift the shadows. Like, as you can see here, this is 1/30th of a second, and if I go to the 1/30th of a second ambient exposure, everything is kind of underexposed inside. So I'll add flash in different parts of the room, and then I'll remove myself from the photo and leave just the good bits. And that's kind of what I want to teach today, is how do you wrangle these files into the finished image. So I'm just going around, flashing, bouncing into the ceiling, trying to fill the room with light. And I kind of have like an archive of thousands of funny pictures of myself looking like a goon, kind of like just flashing and my underwear's hanging out and everything. But so I've got tons and tons of shots like that. And then obviously we have to make sure the color is right, because this is actually what the color looks like straight out of camera, which is like this gross vomit green kind of thing. And I'll touch on that a little bit. And then I want to show you, of course, how I put it all together into this the finished image here. So that's kind of how I shot it and my approach to it. So what I want to go through is how I get the files from Lightroom into Photoshop. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'll line them all up. I'll start with my bracketed images all the way at the beginning of the series. So that's kind of my starting point, and that's going to be my base image, what I'm going to build off of. Then after that, I will put my flashy images next to that. And then finally, I will have my color correction image. And when I'm done, my finished image will go at the end. So it's kind of a stack of images there, all lined up left to right, like a timeline, so I can follow myself through as I shot and as I composited. So the first thing I want to do is get these ready to take into Photoshop. And there are a couple of tools in Lightroom that I use to kind of just tame the files a little bit, to get them, right now the dynamic range is all over the place. And I have the raw files in front of me, so I might as well work with them because they're going to have far more latitude in terms of dynamic range and color and pushing and pulling than they would in Photoshop once they're rasterized. So I'm going to look, and I want to see like what are the good parts of each picture. So in this first one, I see the good part here is that window view. So I'm just going to edit this, do a quick Lightroom edit for the window view, disregarding everything else. So I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to pretend this is my picture. I just want this beautiful horizon with blue sky, blue water. And I'm just going to edit it very gently in Lightroom to get it to look how I envision it would in the final image. So I'll add a little bit of contrast, a touch of saturation, and I'll bring the highlights down So it kind of takes on some of that dark blue ocean mood that we know so well. I'm not going to touch the shadows because I like the blue kind of being darker. I like a little bit of clarity, and I think the colors look pretty good on that. And then the next thing I'm going to do is think about what the next image I want to use is. And I'm thinking that this here, even though these highlights are blown, this is looking to be a good starting point for what will be the base image. That is what I will build off of to make my final picture. So I'm going to see what happens if I pull the highlights down a little bit, and it cleans that up nicely. And you can see if I undo that highlight adjustment, the couch is completely blown out. I don't really want any blown out parts. It depends on the look you're going for, but for an interior designer who carefully and meticulously chose the fabrics and furnishings, my personal belief is don't blow it out. She spent hours upon hours furnishing this place, making it look good, keep the colors there. So I kind of bring back the highlights just so that we get the natural color of the furnishing. And as you can see, with the highlight alert turned on, all those highlights are gone. So this looks a little bit underexposed. And I want to back up and go and answer the question that will inevitably come up is, why don't you just not light it and do all this crazy compositing and just use the highlight and shadow slider? Well, this is about as properly exposed as we're going to get without any lighting. So as you can see, the histogram is perfectly kind of in the middle with the bias to the right-hand side. So it looks like it's properly exposed. But if I bring the highlights all the way down and I bring the shadows up a bit to kind of make it more correct, the window view is still very muddy and hazy and gray and kind of gross because there's detail that we're just never going to get back. And the shadows, it's going to start to get noisy. You can see the crazy noise down in here. And you're not going to get the great contrast that lighting gives you. So even though you theoretically can pull the highlights and shadows to make the image better, I try not to. I just try to bring it back as much as I need to get all the highlights in check and all the shadows where I want them before I go into Photoshop. So I'll do that. Like I said, I think this looks like a good base image. So I'm going to rate it 1 star. It's just my little weird way of remembering what I'm using. So if I'm going to use it in the composite, I will rate it 1 star. You can use colors, you can use a little notepad, whatever you're going to do. I'll rate it 1 star. And then this one, there's some good things about this picture as well. I kind of like the warm, bright, natural ceiling. This all looks like it's far, far too blown out. And I kind of like you start to see some of the texture in the lighting, that directional light that gives depth and pop. I hate the word pop, but it gives depth and pop to all the objects in the room. When you see those shadows, I like to keep the shadows in there. We're starting to see some shadows. I'm going to keep this one, so I'll mark that 1 star as well. And like I said, I love the ceiling. The ceiling is really starting to look like it's a spread in a magazine, so I'm going to keep that. This one is just kind of a safety bracket. This is kind of way overexposed. But what I do like is that I begin to see the fireplace detail. And we see those, she's picked out these really beautiful glass crystals in the fireplace instead of wood or metal or some kind of funky gas fireplace. So I might use that one and kind of drag out the fireplace just so we see detail in there. And in that case, I'm going to see a little more shadow detail. So I'm going to bump the shadows just a little bit on that exposure. And then we get into me running around with my light and just going crazy. It looks like I'm going insane, but there's somewhat of a method to it. I want to kind of emulate the natural light, and if we study this room, you'll see that all the light's coming from one direction. And if I were to stand behind the camera and just blast that pro photo into the ceiling, it would wash out any kind of depth or texture or believability to the room. So all the flash pops I do are going to kind of come from that side, just to keep the texture, the mood, the feel of the room. The brightest thing is where the eye is going to go, and we want the eye to go, right over the furniture, right out the window, because that room, that view is one of the best parts of the room. And even though it's for an interior designer, the view is really integral to capturing the feel of the room. So her potential clients, who's going to put it on her website, they're going to see, she did this amazing room right on the ocean. If they have an ocean house, they get the same kind of feel from it. So keep the light kind of like it is in the room naturally, and kind of emulate your strobe to do that accordingly. So again, I'm standing where the sun is coming in and bouncing a light, trying to get some light from front to back. And here I am, again, trying to lift some shadow. And this is a great example of using the light to kind of balance. I've kind of left the couch properly exposed and the curtains properly exposed, and we still have the view, but obviously the problem is that we have our reflection in the glass here. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. If I am, just slow me down. And on we go, walking around, flashing, just making sure that I get different parts of the room and that I'm always not in the way of everything, so I can always take the two halves, line them up, and Photoshop myself out. So that's me flashing everything, and then the last thing that I do before I finish the shot is I take a giant color checker card. This is the X-Rite Color Checker Classic. It's like 50 or 60 bucks. Could be more now, you know, the things are always going up, but a very worthy investment. And what I'm going to do, just to show you how I color correct things before I go into Photoshop, is I will use the color checker card, and then it says pick a target neutral in Lightroom. So this is, we know it's a solid gray. We can click on that, and we have gone from this like kind of greenish, gross color to what we know is a pretty accurate representation of the colors in the room. So I'm not going to use that frame in anything, and what I'm going to do is just select all, and I'm going to apply that white balance adjustment to all the pictures before I jump into Photoshop, and that'll give us a good starting point. I tell people that unless you're in a studio, to get perfect color in interiors is so difficult, because as soon as sunlight comes in, we have one light source. The sun is going to come in, it's going to hit a blue couch, going to hit a red couch, going to hit a green whatever, and it's just going to instantly start going crazy with the colors. So I get a good representation off of this color checker, and then in Photoshop I'll tweak it even further, because like I said, you're never going to get perfect color when shooting architecture unless you're in some kind of studio setup.